Good morning, Bill.
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
Welcome to the day. Well, it's a beautiful day here in Central Texas, and it's just doing okay. Looks like it's pretty nice outside your place, unless that's a fake background.
Yeah, it's a fake background. It is a little dreary, but I mean, I always count my blessings when it comes to, living on the Pacific Coast. I feel very fortunate that I live where I live. So
good. I spent a few weeks on the Sunshine Coast a few years ago. Utterly beautiful, just beautiful. Didn't get over to the island, but nice place. Yeah.
Listen, I don't want to choke you up at all, but let's try and put some guardrails in here. And I was thinking that your daughter spent the last part of her life in British Columbia,
yes.
In the interior. Did you make in that period of time when your daughter was still living? Did you spend much time in BC, or did you get to explore? Oh, you did, eh?
That's when we were there. She lived in Nelson, sort of outside of Nelson, someplace I forget the name of the place, but it was up a road in between mountains that you couldn't get any cell phone reception, but it was in near Nelson. And then we spent, so we visited her a couple times there, and then there was one summer where she and her wife, Mireille, I forget if they were married yet at the time, but her girlfriend, Mireille had a sister who lived in, I don't remember the name of the town, someplace on the Sunshine Coast. So we went there, hung out a little bit in Vancouver, and went up the coast and spent some time in the B&B, hiked around in the mountains a little bit. Beautiful country. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Okay. Well, let's not. We weren't. I mean, the purpose of today's discussion was to actually talk about Daniel Dennett.
Okay.
And existentialism. So I'm going to bring up, the particular article here that you wrote. Do you recall when you wrote this article?
Well, let me see. I can look that up real quick. June 3rd, 2014.
Interesting. Yeah, and that's the thing about our publishing model. We don't, as you know, we republish in something we call an iterative publishing model. Which means that it can resurface as it does on a monthly basis. But I guess the question would be that, do you return to your work at all? Do you read this again? Do you say to yourself, oh, I could update, add, or improve on something that I wrote in 2014? How do you reflect on what you've written from almost a decade ago? How do you approach that typically?
Well, I don't go back and revisit it. Every now and then, just for grins, I maybe read something I wrote a while ago and think, oh, well, hey, that was pretty good. But I don't typically. There were a couple of the blog essays that I wrote, and then somebody wrote to me and said, hey, your logic is wrong here, so I fixed it. But that's rare. For instance, this Dennett piece, I have no interest in revising it. First of all, I don't have any complaints about how it's written. I still believe what it says, so it's fine. If I have new thoughts, typically I will write a new essay.
Yeah.
Like I recently wrote, forget how recently, but a thing on function, function is very important in my book, How to Be an Excellent Human. And this actually relates to Dennett and Sartre and de Beauvoir, that the essential function of a human being is to be able to reflect on himself or herself. Self-reflection. It's also called metacognition. I call it second order thinking. And that's what Dennett was getting at in that essay, and also what Sartre and de Beauvoir are getting at, in that humans have a very powerful intellect. We're very, very good at envisioning states of affairs that are not currently happening, but that we would like to have happen, and figuring out ways to make them happen. That could be as simple as, oh, I need some bread and eggs. So I'll write them on a list and go to the grocery store and go get them. That writing in the list is a way we use our intelligence to plan ahead. That's all the way up to a project that spans multi-years and thousands of or millions of dollars and is very, very complex. Humans can do all that. They can look at the world and, as I said, envision the state of affairs that they would like to have happen and figure out how to make it happen and then make it happen. What's crucial, but other animals have that same capacity to a lesser degree because they're not as smart as humans. There's evidence that apes can envision things and so forth, and in a sort of primitive way. What humans can do is take that vast intelligence and turn it on ourselves. I, as a human being, can not only look at stuff I need to do in the world, but I can also look at how well I'm functioning in order to accomplish those things, and improve my functioning, or change my approach, or something like that. So that ability for self-reflection, self-awareness, we might call it metacognition, might call it second-order thinking, or just not just thinking about the world, that's first-order thinking, but thinking about yourself while thinking about the world. That's the second-order cognition. That's what I call the human function, the essential thing that humans do. And if you learn to do it well, that's a key to living well, to living a fulfilled and what the Greeks called eudaimonistic life, a life of happiness, flourishing. It's been translated as flourishing, fulfillment. So back to the original question, do I ever revise that kind of stuff? No, but I learned more about function, about what function is. And did we talk about that last time? Anyway, that's another topic. But instead of revising my book, because it wasn't wrong, it just wasn't quite complete, then I wrote another essay about it.
Yeah, I find the same thing. I mean, I noticed that there's subtleties to what I write years ago that may require some improvement. But generally, I have a similar type of feeling that what I've written in years past is actually, and I'm not going to say valid, because the thing is that I'm not always trying to evoke the gods of logic, right? So, sometimes it may be more poetic, and I would maintain that there is a sorting function at play there with poetics, but it does, on reflection, years afterwards, still resonates. It still I still read it and think, oh, okay, yeah, I can see what I was trying to do there. I would like to speak a little bit more about function, because I also use the framing of function in relationship. Well, I would say I use the function framing. It's very integral into my thinking as well. I think we differ in how we frame it. And I'm actually really intrigued. I like the way you're framing it in terms of a metacognition. And I think that and it's like this first order, second order thinking, and it completely makes sense. I'd framed it as slightly different, as something where function forms more of a pragmatic function. I mean, how do you say function forms a function? But I guess the idea of function was that it grounded the abstractions, right? So the creative abstractions, the function actually grounded the metaverse, so to speak. And then I arranged it in a way that you try and think, well, what comes first? The abstract reasoning, or the function? Do you look at, well, I have a goal, I'm trying to accomplish something, I'm trying to, or does the abstract reasoning come first? And I mean, I kind of know the answer, but it's interesting. How do you fit together the interplay of function and form? That's what I'm curious about.
That's all right. So I'm just talking off the top of my head here, but there's the phrase from some famous architect: form follows function. But you're asking whether the function comes first or the abstract thought comes first. I think that there's no universal answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes you have an idea that's unrelated to any mundane concern, and then you think, oh, that could be useful here and there. And then sometimes you have a mundane concern. How am I going to move this obstacle out of my way so I can continue on the path? And oh, look, there's a lever over there. I mean, a branch I could use as a lever and so forth. And you can use that to function as a moving implement. So it's like, which comes first? There's no universal answer. It kind of depends. But form and function, I think they co-evolve. I think, for instance, the polar bears have white fur. Well, that's an aspect of their form, and they also have a certain body type. It's sort of, it's not long and skinny. It's more short and fat, kind of like a lot of bears. Well, why do they have those things? Because those attributes contribute to their ongoing life. The white fur, the whiteness of the fur provides a sort of camouflage, so predators find it harder to see them. And of course, the thickness of the fur provides warmth, and their body type provides warmth. All of these things serve the function of keeping the animal alive. So did they have the form first or the function first? No, it sort of co-evolved. There's been interesting research about, I'm trying to think of some kind of moth that was white, and it would be hard to see against the background of a white birch tree. This was in England in like 1800s or something. Don't know the details. But as the Industrial Revolution happened and there was more and more black smoke coming out of smokestacks and chimneys, the birch trees got darker and darker, and the moths got darker and darker. That is to say, the darker moths had more reproductive success than the lighter moths in that situation where the environment was changing. So you could say the function of their coloration was to provide camouflage, and as the environment changed, and their color had to change in order to fulfill the function. So in that case, the form follows the function. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
well, I think the more the wiser and the correct response is that it co-evolves.
That's what I say. They co-evolve. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I mean, essentially, what you did is you talked about our unique ability as humans to introspection, I guess is what you were referring to. And
introspection is, excuse me, one kind of second order thinking. It's not the only kind. So there's introspection where you can look at your own thoughts and go, oh, I'm compulsing about such and such, which I don't want to be compulsing about such and such. So I can evolve, or I can come up with different strategies. Well, I'll just forcefully make myself think about something else, or I'll go on a walk to take my mind off of it, or I'll get busy cleaning the house, or I'll alter my pattern of breath. All these ways of, you can introspect and see yourself doing something, and then you can change it. That's the crucial part about the second order thinking, metacognition, and that's just what Dennett and Sartre and de Beauvoir were getting at. We can actually change ourselves because we have the ability to view ourselves. Okay, so introspection is one kind of second order thinking. Another kind of second order thinking is just like at the end of your day, you go, okay, what did I do today, and what did I do well, what did I not do well? Doesn't necessarily have to do with introspection, but Um, but your outward performance, excuse me, then how did I interact with a certain person? Oh, I can see how I got triggered and didn't treat them well, and maybe I can do that better next time. That's another kind of second order thinking, but it's not introspection. It's like viewing yourself, thinking about yourself as if you're sort of outside yourself, which is one of the one of the things that Sartre and de Beauvoir talk about. And there's others, like over the course of, I say I'm a kid about to go to college. What do I want to study? Well, I'm really interested in such and such. Maybe I should study that. And well, do you want to go out for sports? Yeah, well, maybe I'm not real good at football, say, either kind, football or soccer, but I really enjoy swimming. So maybe I'll go out for swimming. That's it. That's using your knowledge of yourself to guide your future actions. It's another kind of second order thinking. It's what we do a lot of the time, and what our ability to do it well is what distinguishes us from other animals that don't do it quite so well. And we can do it poorly as well. So that the idea is to learn to enhance your ability to think about yourself. And that's just to think about yourself. You take yourself as an object of thought, but also enhance your ability to observe yourself. This is your introspection in the moment, and learn to come up with better strategies for being in the world.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. So I'm hearing a couple things. I'm hearing that we have the ability to change our destinies with a strong natural selective reality that points to an evolutionary underpinning. Would that be fair to say?
Well, there's an evolutionary underpinning to all of what we do and are, sir.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I often reflect on the wisdom of the Greeks, and let's see if we can pull this back into Daniel Dennett and the topic of existentialism here.
Okay.
But I often look back at the ancient Greek tradition, and I'd like you to maybe expand on this, where there's the maximum of know thyself.
Yeah.
Right. The Socratic thing. And how do you see the movement of existentialism being defined in history versus the what we've learned from ancient Greece? What's the contribution of existentialism as a whole? And then we'll start to move into Dennett.
All right, that's a huge topic. It's quite well known that Heidegger, for instance, was enamored with the ancient Greeks and had his own way of explaining, coming up with an exegesis of what the Greeks were actually after. The crucial insight, or the crucial method of phenomenology, which is where not only Heidegger, but Sartre and de Beauvoir and a lot of others came from, was a radical first-person point of view, which is to say, well, this is your introspection. It's a kind of introspection. You pay attention to your experience, either as it's happening or just immediately afterwards in your memory, and you identify structures of experience, structures of what's happening in experience. This is Husserl's program. And the contribution of Sartre and de Beauvoir was to take that same first-person point of view, and it's such a radical first-person point of view because it tries to avoid depending on interpretations or theories that come from other places. Like you could look at how your You can look at how your perception works, just in the moment. Some things are in focus, some things are over the side, kind of more vague, and so forth. You can look at how you have an expectation. If you're looking at some physical thing, you have an expectation. If you moved around and looked at it in a different way, you would see different sides of it, and so forth. You can actually find those interpretations and expectations and memories as well in the experience, if you look carefully enough, look in quotes. But you can also study the mind through the study of the brain. How does neural functioning, how does your brain work to produce images, visual images? And how does the brain work to anticipate looking at the other side, and so forth? When you're doing phenomenology, you don't want to think about how the brain's working. You attempt to not think about or not take into account the historical progress, the historical process by which you came to be where you are and doing what you are. So Sartre and de Beauvoir take that same first-person approach, not just to perception of physical objects, not just to perception of logical numerical constructs, which is one of the things Husserl was into, but to the actual experience of living your life in the world. How does it feel to actually be alive? And you find, among other things, that you're in the world, that you're always interacting with other people. You find that there's a certain, Sartre and de Beauvoir talk about freedom and facticity. Facticity is the stuff that you're just stuck with and is very difficult to change. The fact that I have a human body, the fact that I have blue eyes, or a certain color of hair, or I have a certain ability to play basketball, say, whatever. That's just sort of facts about who you are. But there's also a freedom. Now, the freedom is limited. Sartre and de Beauvoir act as if it's not. In some cases, they go all the way to an extreme. But for instance, I got blue eyes. Well, that's just a fact, unless I put in some kind of lenses or something that change my color of my eyes, right? But even that doesn't actually change the color of my eyes; it just masks it. That's facticity. But the fact that I'm a moderately good swimmer, I can look at that and say, okay, if I train and practice, I could become a better swimmer. I could learn how to do it better. I could get a coach. So there's a way to improve your functioning and change to a certain degree who you are. That's what they're getting at when they say, we find a human being is a being who questions himself and as being a being who is at a distance from himself. That's from de Beauvoir, I believe. So your ability to take a step back, to look at yourself, enables you to change yourself. I mean, the simplest, relatively simple example is learning how to perform at a sport better. More profound example might be if you find yourself having trouble relating to certain kind of people or in certain situations, and you find yourself getting all foggy and can't function well. You can look at yourself and figure out what's going on and actually change your behavior so that eventually you become, in that respect, a different person. You actually take command of your own fate to a certain extent. Now, there's this tension between freedom and facticity. You're not able, even though how much I'd like to, I'm not able to jump off the roof and fly away someplace. But I could get in an airplane. I could get in a balloon and fly around. So there's ways around that aspect of facticity. So, and Dennett he recognizes the same fact about human existence. Dennett says reflective investigation everything is going to change everything. We look closely at looking closely. The looking closely is a first order activity. Looking closely at looking closely is a second order activity. We increase our investment in techniques for increasing our investment in techniques. It's like it's an upward spiraling ability, our ability to cognize ourselves, to take aspects of ourselves into account, and then change our behavior and even change our attitudes. So that's really quite an exciting kind of freedom. It's the freedom that artists have. They look at stuff and they go, what if we change that color? What if I'm going to, I don't know how artists work. My wife's an artist. I have immense appreciation for her, but I couldn't do what she does. But she comes up with this stuff. Well, it's just beautiful. How did you do that? No, well, I just, did this. Well, she's spent years and years honing her craft and learning to do it better. So art and creativity, we were talking about this last time, I think, the ability to envision something that's not currently present. And the second order thing is envision ways of being in the world ourselves that are not currently present, but could be, and we take steps to make that happen.
And so, and back to the form and the function, because this is something that, using your wife as an example, I think still, let's see how this resonates here. So with the idea that she still wants to function, exist, be in this world as an artist, then she approaches the world based on that, and from that function forms the beautiful interpretations of what she's trying to manifest into. Is it? Would that be fair to say?
That's close. She doesn't necessarily want to be an artist. She just is one. But she recognized that talent, and other people around her recognize that talent very early, and she's honed that craft and done it so well. So I can't really get into her head and speak for her, but when she wants to create something, she has an idea of what she wants to create. Maybe it's a very vague idea. This often happens, I think. She has an idea. She knows her craft. She knows if she uses this kind of color and that kind of brush and this kind of pressure and so forth, and make that kind of shape, then it more and more closely approaches what she has in her mind. She probably doesn't have a very super detailed thing in her mind, but as the physical thing approaches what she has in mind becomes clearer as well. There's another sort of coevolution of mentality and physicality of freedom and facticity. But really, that's my wife is an artist. I can talk about myself as a writer. Something very similar happens. I get, there's a topic. I'm going to write this about topic. Then I get to a certain place. I have to make a transition to the next thing, and I got to do a little research here. And so there's a back and forth and iterative process, and I write something. And then I go back and change this word and move that paragraph around and so forth. All the while trying to approach what I had in mind, even though what I had in mind wasn't nearly as detailed as what I've actually got on the paper or the computer screen in front of me.
Right. Do you sometimes feel that you're that the words are not fully capturing what and how you think about the concepts, or do words fall short of what Bill's philosophy is?
That's an interesting question, and this is going to sound quite arrogant, but no, words don't fall short for me. I am master of words. I can make words do what I want to do. If I were a poet or a novelist, I've tried to write short stories and stuff, and words just that's not the right word. I don't know what the right word is, and I have trouble with that. But expository writing of presenting ideas, no, I'm the master of my words. I mean, sometimes I think this doesn't quite right, and I'll think about it, and I'll come up with something else. There's a little little secret of the trade. I have a word, and I think, I want to use some other word. I just go go to an online thesaurus. Oh, look, there's some other words. Just try one of those, and they fit. So, but when I'm doing my philosophical writing, I rarely, if I'm find myself in a situation where the words aren't saying what I really have in mind, then I will find better words, and I can do that.
Do you ever invent words or concepts? I mean, I'm sure you do. I can point. I think you can take a novel approach on something and say my interpretation of this is just slightly different from what I've as an academic I've come to understand. So, are you, in your body of work, do you have any, I'm going to say, trademarkable name words? Trademark's the wrong approach from the standpoint of business, but are there any that are like really unique to you, words and concepts?
Like words, probably not. I used to, early on, what I'm calling second order thinking, I used to call second order mentation, which is in your mind, it's mental. And I realized that sounds a little too highfalutin and also a little abstract. So I said, oh, let's call it second order thinking. But that's not quite sure that's what you had in mind. If I haven't made up any words, oh, well, sometimes I call it, there's a phrase I use, coherence of interiority. And that sounds a little mysterious, and it's kind of existentialist sort of, by that I mean the interiority, your internal state, that which you are or can become conscious of, but somebody outside you, like I'm thinking of a white polar bear, unless I told you, you wouldn't know I was thinking that. So the interiority, the coherence of interiority is how well it integrates, how well all the pieces, the subjective pieces of myself, the thoughts, feelings, emotions, impulsions to action, bodily feelings, how they cohere into a unified and harmonious whole. And that can be done more or less successfully. I mean, schizophrenics they either have no coherence of interiority, or maybe they have more than one, but it doesn't cohere the way a non-schizophrenic person does, that kind of thing. And the coherence of interiority is a direct reflection of the coherence of your exteriority. If you live in a situation that's all chaotic and confused and frightening and stuff, well, you're going to be chaotic and confused and frightened. And it takes some effort to keep your mind, so to speak, when everybody else around you is losing their mind. So there's a.
I don't know about that, Bill, because I read, you pointed something out to me, and this is interesting how, we might have different people who can thrive in different situations. And so Proust, I believe it was Proust, actually did his writing in a very chaotic sort of place. Now, I might be wrong on that, but there was an example, I believe it was from George Steiner, where he gave several examples. And he said basically what he was comparing is that you have one particular influential thinker in our past that was able to produce things in a very chaotic environment, and then other thinkers are only able to produce things in very calm, reflective, kind of spaces. And then to add to that, I'd say I have if I'm not threatened, but if I'm very stressed and not in a good place, right? I mean, I hate how I kind of devalued good, because I keep trying to elevate it in a Platonic sense. But my feeling is that I can produce my best work if I'm in a good environment. right? If I feel good, if I'm worried and stressed out, and it's more difficult for me to organize thoughts and parse information in a meaningful way.
Yeah. Well, me too. I exactly the same thing. This business about some people like to have a lot of what we call an environmental load around them. Like sit in a cafe and there's people talking and chattering and clinking of coffee cups and so forth. And for some people, that is a good environment for them to focus on what they're thinking, because I'm that way at times. I like to have something going on around me so I don't feel like totally isolated. But at other times, I like to just, okay, I'm in my special writing chair with my special writing setup, and I'm focused, and they'll bother me with other stuff. I'm focused. Well, the fact that some people like one kind of environment, some people like another kind of environment, fine. That's just, people are different. What's crucial is to know which kind of environment you work best in. Okay. So, or at what times and what situations, so that you can arrange your external environment such that your internal space is, like you say, you're in a good headspace, so to speak, and you can focus and do your work. So that's where the self-knowledge, self-awareness, metacognition, second order thinking, that's where that comes in. It helps us function better.
And I apologize to you and any of the listeners of not providing some solid examples. And sometimes I get a little excited about that. So I thought about actually Karl Marx, and so I tend to not spend a lot of time with Marx. I mean, he's inevitable, and I keep going back to him. But the conditions from which his contributions emerged from were fairly horrific in terms of comfort. I mean, the man was desperately poor. He when he wrote the Communist Manifesto, the number of people in the party were basically him and Engels, right? Like in this group. So, I mean, it's he what emerged this and you can put it on a spectrum from cult all the way to I guess like geez, how would I summarize Marx's contributions? I mean, because it's the breadth is so deep with economics and political theory, and I guess we could summarize political theory all the way to cult, just for the point of making a false dichotomy, right?
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So from that standpoint, the emergence of his contribution is what it is. It's what we know today. I mean, we could have interpreted it in a little different way, which may have saved a lot of lives. But the idea that if the substrate or the conditions or the environment had been different, how would the Marx voice have emerged?
Oh, right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's a counterfactual. If something had been something different, and then what would have happened? Well, we can speculate, but there's no way to know because it's counterfactual. So if Marx had been the son of a wealthy family, he probably wouldn't have had nearly as much interest in improving the plight of the working class. Who's to say?
And yet, some of the great moralists like Montaigne was, it was his ability to sit in a lofty tower was really, a perch given to him by an inheritance.
Right. Look
at Wittgenstein, right?
Yes, right. He was from a very wealthy industrialist family in Germany, I think, and that gave him a lot of freedom to go to, I forget, it was Oxford or Cambridge, and study with Bertrand Russell, and take several years off and go teach high school in a faraway place and so forth. So yeah, he had a lot of privilege, and that certainly gave him the freedom to think about his philosophy. And speaking of Greeks, you were talking about the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greek society, we think they've got lots of really good stuff here. Aristotle, the highest good for human beings is or he would say the highest good for man, because he only considered men as really fully human beings, would be the life of contemplation. Well, the life of contemplation, and this is a Marxian thought, the life of contemplation rests on a physical life of producing goods and food and shelter and so forth to enable the person contemplating to have the time to contemplate. The whole Greek society was based on slavery. You would go out and conquer some other country or city or whatever and bring their people back and make them work for you as slaves. And everybody thought, well, that's, perfectly normal. It's the way it is. We don't.
Can we start over on that one? Because I was following you, but then you've thrown two really, really powerful concepts into one pot. So
Okay.
let's go back to normally, and Bill, I'm usually with you 100%, but if I don't follow you, I won't ask the next good question, or
that's cool.
It's hard to participate. So
fine. Yeah,
we're starting with Aristotle.
Yeah.
Okay. And you brought in the concept of that is essentially Marxian. I don't know if that was a new term or whatever, but Marxist, right?
Yeah.
Because of its communal nature, and I understand that. I mean, that was the idea. Emerged from the Republic, and the Aristotelian concept also, I believe, complemented it. I mean, despite a lot of what people say, Aristotle and Plato actually agreed on a lot of things. So, so you're saying that what emerged from the ancient Greek tradition was
I'm just saying,
like open season towards a destructive communist ideal.
No, not exactly. What I'm saying is that the Greek ideal of the gentleman who engages in sports and engages in debate in the agora and who engages in philosophical contemplation of the good or human nature or whatever, that kind of life was available only to a select few, the males of, say, Athens, and not all the males, but the land-owning males, and the land-owning males who had a bunch of slaves to work their fields and their crops and so forth. We tend to overlook that part of it. And nowadays we would consider that pretty brutal. That's pretty evil, maybe even. Certainly oppressive to all the slaves. So we admire the fruits of the Greeks' thought, and we kind of overlook the material substrate. Okay, and here let's get back to the idea of self-awareness, self-transcendence. Now that we know how oppressive it is and how hard it is for people to be slaves, we think that's morally objectionable. We don't like that anymore. So we don't do that anymore, for the most part. And now we have a different kind of slaves. Excuse me. We have mechanical slaves and electronic slaves. Instead of sending our slave off to look something up in the library, we just get on Google and find it. Instead of sending our slaves to drive the horse and wagon to go get some supplies, we just get in our car and we can do it. Or we call a DoorDash or one of those things to go get it for us. So we're still dependent on a material substrate of providing sustenance and all the things that the material body needs. We're just doing it in a way that doesn't harm other human beings as much as the ancient Greeks do. So now that we have that material substrate that's less harmful to everybody, we're perhaps even more free to examine life and find grand themes and conceptual ways of thinking about things and so forth.
Well, I want to add something to that assessment. I think I have more of I go back to the ancient Greeks probably more than you do. So we could spend a couple episodes on that. But a couple things to point out: the loss of the Peloponnesian War means that they were a society in contemplation about why we were losing. Why, if we were the ideal perfected society, what was it about our democracy? What was it about us not being a militant society like Sparta was that that gave us this result? And so you'll see many of Plato's suggestions about how to run an ideal society in the Republic and later on in the Laws have a lot to do with have a lot of contributions from Sparta. And I mean, that's about the most that's a very militaristic. I mean, just to say the obvious. I mean, that's very so.
Right.
Bringing to the point to say, well, how do we create a society where people have more time to participate in that second order thinking, more time for self-reflection, more time to develop their individuality and their relationship of individuality with their society. So that would be the question. And then are the two antithetical with actually getting stuff done? Like, can we have some sort of like homogeneous state where everybody can participate in a fair amount of thinking, or does it relegate the Bills and the Daniels to do this kind of thing while other people are changing their bed sheets?
Well, that's a good question. The ideal would be a society in which everyone had the opportunity to expand and fawn and live through and cultivate their gifts and talents, whatever they were. Some people might be intellectual like you and me. Some people might be more practical. There's a guy up the street from me that I see him in his workshop. He's like all kinds of sawing and cutting and building beautiful things, just very functional and beautiful stuff for him and himself and his family. Well, he's not interested in deep, I don't know. He's not interested to the degree that you and I are in deep philosophical discussions and thoughts and stuff. But he's a damn good woodworker. So, and he has the capacity to do that because he's affluent enough, as you and I are, to pursue these interests. So the ideal society would be one in which all the material needs were met. I mean, this is what Marx was getting at. Whether it worked out in practice or not is a whole different question. But his idea was that everybody would have the material basis of society would be such that everybody had enough to live on. They have enough shelter. They have enough food. They had enough companionship and so forth that they could pursue their own gifts, their own talents. Everybody's different, of course. So some people could be great runners. Some people could be great woodworkers. Some people could tune motorcycles and drive around. It's like, and some people could study philosophy, and some people would study physics and chemistry, and whatever you would want to do that would fulfill your innate talents, you'd be able to do. That would be an ideal society. Well, in order to make that happen, you have to take care of the material substrate in some way. And slavery's not the best way. There are certain aspects of capitalism that relegate, as you say, some people to changing our bed sheets because they don't have an opportunity to do anything better than that. There are some aspects of communism that do the same, that just relegate people to impoverished existence. So I guess my take on the relative merits of capitalism and socialism as economic structures, either one would work if people were enlightened enough to do it well. in the sense of rational self-interest. Like if you look at it rationally, it's really not even, it's not in the interests of even the richest people in our society to have a whole lot of people not having enough and being angry and disgruntled and hurting and stuff. That's an argument I would make, that really we're all better off, even the richest of us, if we're all better off, so to speak.
Bill, that's really interesting. That I really like that that summary to say that communism and capitalism would both work if we did it well. That is really interesting, and it makes me smile. I think there's some wisdom in there, which isn't it what it's all about? Look, we have 9 minutes left, 10 if we're a little bit liberal with our minutes. I'd like you to spend the last 10 minutes really reflecting or giving the listeners a bit of information, some insight, some wisdom about what's happening in the Ukraine and where you think this Russia thing is going. I'm not asking for a prediction, but what's Putin up to, and what's going on? How are you processing this?
I take a sort of stoic attitude. I watch it on the news or hear about it, and I go, oh my God, that's awful. And what is Putin up to? He's a megalomaniac, and he has no checks and balances on his power. And for some reason, he's got a burr in his saddle about Ukraine. So he's just going to go in and just take it. He's a thug. Okay. He's a very powerful thug with a great big army. But what can I do about it? So I try not to obsess about it. I'll work for my chosen political party and so forth and try to elect good people. But as far as what I can do to influence the course of affairs in Ukraine, not much. I could probably donate some money to Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, that kind of thing. But so I don't tend to think about it. I don't have a prognostication or a punditry about Ukraine. I think, as I said, Putin's a thug. He hopes to get away with it. And I sure hope the Western sanctions against him work. I did come across one interesting commentary about it. Putin's invading Ukraine. The price of oil is going way up. Russia provides a lot of oil. So now Putin's getting more money from the oil he sells. And the United States has got an embargo on Venezuelan oil because the Venezuelans had the temerity to try to tax ExxonMobil and some other oil companies. Well, Venezuela has lots of oil. If we would undo the boycott of Venezuelan oil, all of a sudden there'll be a lot of oil. The price would come down. That would hurt Russia even more. Now, I don't know if that's a realistic strategy. It's just something I read in one of the political commentaries, but it's something, But again, what can I, as an individual person, do about it? Not much. Write some letters to Congress people and that kind of thing. So I don't tend to devote a lot of time to thinking about the situation in Ukraine any more than just kind of following the news about it.
Thank you for that, Bill. And you cut our 10 minutes in half, so we still have 5 minutes. And I was wondering,
I think fast.
Yeah, you do. You think fast. So I think I'm going to say 2 points. This seems to me to fall back onto your, I'm going to say function doctrine. It's the only thing that comes to mind. I know it's not a doctrine, but this function heuristic. Okay, so it falls onto the function heuristic to say there's a practical approach to what you do and how you process the situation in Ukraine, right? Mm-hmm. Now, my next question actually has to do with climate change. Do you find any parallels between what Bill can actually do about Ukraine and parallels with what Bill can do about climate change, in terms of affecting change? And then do you take a similar structured approach in terms of your activities to say, well, me as an individual, I can only do this, so I have to parse out some of that information in order to be, the most effective participant in society?
For me, climate change is more personal in the situation as Ukraine, because as we all know, climate's changing in drastic ways. And even up in BC, where you were, there was some town in the mountains that started burning because it was 120 degrees Fahrenheit, which is unheard of in that part of your country. And then it gets pretty damn hot down here in Texas. And there's floods and and fires and all kinds of stuff. So climate change is clearly a existential threat, in the sense of a threat to our existence, not a philosophical threat. So what can I do about climate change? I can attempt to live in a more parsimonious manner. I can vote for and work for policies that'll mitigate climate change. And there's all kinds of little things that we can all do. Recycle my compost, that kind of thing. Each little bit of it doesn't make much difference, but it makes more difference than not doing it at all. So let's do it. That kind of thing.
Good. Okay, well, there you have it, a full hour of talking with Bill, and that is another episode. So I want to thank Bill for spending some time with us, and we'll return next month and talk about something similar.
Something else, eh?
And something else, but probably returning to many of the themes that we've been able to, parse out here. So I want to thank Bill, and have the next 30 days of your life. I hope it's filled with a nice framework for you to produce some of your best work and continue on doing the thinking you're doing. So thanks, Bill.
Well, thank you, Daniel. You have a good day.
All
Thanks
right.
for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.